So we intermingled with each other. We had parties and dancing and things like that with our neighbors. And we were on one group all the time, always together. And this is something that was coming wrong with our life. Now today we're all separated all over. And you don't see many Jewish families together here. There's mostly, you're out in the outskirts or something like that. At one time, the North Side was completely Jewish.
We go around and say, I was poorer than you, he was poorer than you, and that we're not saying who was wealthier, who was poorer. And we had a good upbringing in the ghetto. We didn't have to lock our doors, and everybody was an open house.
And I recall on real cold, blistery days, Sundays, she'd be out on like a tag day. She'd be out selling tags. Well, that's what we'd learn charity from our parents. And I thought that was very important.
Harold?
Well, similar to what happened to his family. We didn't have any money either. And she mostly said character was a big part of her life. She's a character. She couldn't write English at all. She had to make an X, my mother. My father could speak 6 or 7 different languages. He knew what he was doing. My mother knew very little, but she knew enough to get us growing up pretty well.
I think in terms of community involvement, Talmud Torah, certainly Bethel, and the Minneapolis Federation for Jewish Service were very important to my parents, and I recall them, being active in these. One thing I recall from my childhood, if we have a minute or two, because this left an impact on me. It was during the polio scare in 1947-48, and it was during the summer, and we had nothing to do really. We couldn't go beyond a certain place, and so we stayed and decided to have a carnival. I had cousins living next door, as I said, and we decided we would invite people to come. We would raise money for Sister Kenny, and that would be our thing for that summer. So we did. Over 100 people came. We raised $55 for Sister Kenny, which at that time I think was a considerable sum, and we turned it over to them. We were really proud of ourselves. We felt that summer we had really done something important, and somewhere in a box somewhere there's a receipt from the Sister Kenny Institute acknowledging our contribution of $55. So I think we felt a commitment. I think perhaps that involvement in Jewish organizations, went over into, doing maybe good other things during the summer. And so I remember that vividly.
The little house that we lived in at 2816 Penn was a small house. It was really a one-bedroom house, and we improvised upstairs and made it kind of like a dormitory where most of my family lived, because my grandmother had another daughter who was living there. So there were 6 people with 1 bathroom, and it was tight. But the thing that was interesting was my mother and my grandmother were excellent cooks, and they prepared the holiday dinners, and we invited the family, and we had a table that was probably good for seating 4 people, maybe 6. Well, we had about 20.
Jewish people were very generous, and we only had a 2-bedroom house, and Dr. George Gordon called my parents one day and he said, I have 2 girls who are orphans. Would you please take them in? Here we had 4 children and 2 bedrooms, and my father took these 2 girls in, and they lived with us until they were married.
In order to get into the project, first of all, you had to be in dire straits. Second of all, you needed somebody to recommend you for the project, and the person who helped us get in there was a rabbi by the name of Hyman, Rabbi Hyman, who was very active on the north side. And the projects were great as far as I was concerned.
What were your dire straits?
Well, my father had passed away when I was 8. My mother never remarried, and the only income that we had was from what they called, now they call it ADC, it was called Mother's Pension. And if you were on Mother's Pension, every month they would write you out a slip, and you could go to the grocery store and you could pick out some groceries. Twice a year, we had a social worker who would come to visit us, and they would check my shoes like you check a horse's shoes, look and see if there was any holes in them. If they looked worn, she wrote you out a slip, and you got a pair of shoes. And this is how things went on that way. However, living in the project, you never had to worry about heat or any heating bills or any electric bills or any water bills. The only expense that you had was if you wanted a telephone. Well, in those days, you didn't have a telephone, but you would kind of work something out with a neighbor downstairs. So if you got a telephone call, they'd holler up and you could come down and answer the phone.
My father was a self-employed tinsmith. He was self-employed because he was a very religious man and he wasn't going to work for anybody who would make him work on Shabbos or Yom Tov. I started working, I had a paper route when I was right around my bar mitzvah time. I started relatively late to have a paper route downtown. But I started working in a factory after school in summers, not Shabbos. I didn't work on Shabbos. After schools and summers, my brother-in-law was the production manager of a leather garment factory, and everybody in our family at one time or another worked there. And so I worked there as an examiner from the time I was 14 years old. I made the grand total of 25 cents an hour. I was working there when the wage and hour law came in, and they had to raise me to 35 cents an hour, and they thought that was terrible, so they cut my hours and made me do the same amount of work.
The Jewish men of those days had a selling route or had a little store. There were no jobs available in banks or insurance companies. And all the kids growing up knew that unless they went to college and got a profession, they were going to have to sell shoes or work in a grocery store or sell insurance. And that was something they would never want to do. And their parents never had to tell them to study or to try to get good grades. All the Jewish kids were right at the top of the class.
The families would stress, don't go into our business, but get that education.
Yeah, very good.
And I think that's a reason you'll find that most people didn't go into the family business.
Had I not had the GI Bill of Rights, I don't think I ever would have been able to go to college and get a degree in college. And that happened to a lot of people. And, you know, as poor as we were prior to the war, everybody was able to get a job during the war, and I think people became a little more affluent during the war and after the war.
We had this drive and push from everywhere to succeed and be good students, and you had to go to college and all of this. So as a result, I think most of the guys in our group and most of the guys in the Benny Leonard group were all very active in school, very good students for the most part. And we always seemed, because of that, we seemed to be more than we really were.
The interesting thing about our classes, to talk about that dichotomy, was that in our class it seemed to graduate mostly lawyers, I being one of them. And in your class it seemed to be mostly doctors, you being one of them, for whatever reason.
We had a sense of belonging. Yeah. We felt comfortable there. We knew everybody, and everybody's parents knew if we got in trouble, they'd call our parents. Right. The families watched out for other families.
Families lived very close together. I remember we lived on 10th and Logan when I was born and I was a young boy. And just down the street from us lived my mother's brother. Across the street lived my mother's sister and family. Next door lived my grandparents. Down one block lived another brother, and 2 blocks away lived an aunt.
I had cousins next door and my grandmother down the block. So it was very warm and cozy, kind of like a cocoon, you know, being surrounded by family. We knew all the neighbors, and to this day, I think we still refer to the houses as, well, that was the Berman house, that was the Ziff house, that was the Stillman house, and this is, you know, many, decades later.
We knew everyone. We knew everybody in every house, in every neighborhood. And if you did something wrong, there were parents who were out there who were going to let your parents know they saw so-and-so doing such and such, and this is what went on. So it was really, when it was called Homewood, it was home. I mean, it was that kind of a place. The entire place was really your home. And your friends all lived within, as Joy said, walking distance.
And it kept you in line. It gave you boundaries. It gave you ideals. I think it was a community that will never be replaced.
The ghetto has a negative connotation to it in my mind. Yeah. We were in a gestalt. We were in a very warm and a warm environment. We weren't all Jewish. There were a lot of non-Jews around us.
One of my most
we worked together.
treasured memories, I think, in growing up in North Minneapolis was the connection I think a lot of us felt with the neighborhood, and even with the merchants on Plymouth Avenue. And there was this feeling that I had that a lot of the people were sort of parenting the neighborhood kids, even if they didn't know them. There was this feeling that, you know, you might go into a store and somebody, if you were misbehaving, somebody might not know your name, but they knew who your folks were. And you sort of, you know, there was this surrogate parenting phenomena that I think took place.
Being in North Minneapolis made me totally aware of my Jewishness in a way that living anywhere else could never have accomplished. It was a truly, from top to bottom, Jewish community with a very rich heritage and history that was shared. And I think the commonality that Dick and Bob and I and all of our friends shared together is what created this awareness of being Jewish and being proud to be Jewish.
Anywhere in the world, if somebody learns that you were a North Sider, it's like old home week, even though you didn't know them before. And this has happened to us time and again. It's just a great feeling to have been on the North Side.